Looking at those results, that went well, didn't it? Glyn, what was your reaction when you saw the sort of figures that were coming through?
Well, my first reaction was there's going to be a change of government, and you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to tell that. I thought that the result indicated a shift that's gone on in the last several years, where clearly the numbers showed that people wanted a change, and whether that was because I think after 3 terms of government, it's difficult to maintain the enthusiasm. So whether it was that or whether it was just the policies that had become unpopular with a lot of people, those things added up to just a will for change.
Brett, were you surprised at the poor showing of the Christian parties?
No, I have to say I wasn't surprised. I think that while in New Zealand we have a system that rewards the niche parties, and the Green Parties are perhaps our most successful niche party, I think within the Christian scene we've just got too many niches going on, and I think that's one issue that will be a big one for us to address.
Do you think it would have worked better if the Christian parties, rather than having 3/4 parties that were within that family Christian ethic, if we just had one, would that have worked better?
Well, I think it depends on what you mean by work better. I think if you look at the total numbers, even if you lump them all together, we still wouldn't have had a 5% threshold party. So we'd have been relying on an electorate MP to be elected. So in that sense, the numbers didn't stack up in any event. Some of that could be situational. I think there was, as Glyn identifies, a real mood for change. And I think for many people, they voted for change, which meant they cast a National Party vote.
Glyn, do you think that there was a lot of fuss, wasn't there, right at the beginning when the Christian parties splintered? And I know a lot of Christians that I spoke to said, I really don't want a part of it. There's so much disagreement within those parties. I wouldn't trust them to run a government if they can't run their own party. You can see where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think you often see letters to the editor in Challenge Weekly, and the sentiment that why don't they get together? That question just comes out time and time again. And I think many people may be unaware of how much effort has actually gone in amongst those parties to coming together. But there are differences even at the most fundamental of levels. So, for example, we've just been using the phrase Christian parties. Now, that's a phrase that 2 of those parties you've just mentioned wouldn't use to describe themselves. And so Kiwi Party and United Future certainly don't describe themselves as Christian parties, United Future particularly. They would say they're Christian values-based parties, whereas the Pacific Party and the Family Party would say that, no, we are Christian parties very clearly, and in their constitutions they make that very explicit. So even at that most basic level, you've got differences there.
I suppose the fundamental question is should there be parties that have those ethics and say, okay, we are Christians? Would it be better if Christians were working within the major parties? Brett?
Well, definitely. And I was overjoyed to see that we've got a Deputy Prime Minister who's a Christian. I mean, so that's happening and that's working, and there are MPs on both sides of the House who are professing Christians and working together to try to change society and influence it for the good. So definitely that remains a really valid path and something that I'd give a lot of support to. To say should there or should there not be, well, I find that more difficult to address and say definitively that there shouldn't be. I think that what does tend to happen a little bit is that some people like the idea of being salt, and they'll get in there and they'll try and influence society for good. So they'll stop the rot, if you like. Salt not as a seasoning, but as something that preserves society. And others are perhaps more comfortable being light, shining light in dark places. And I think that's sometimes where people come out. The only challenge with that is that I think Jesus said, don't be either or, be both and, salt and light. And I think that's perhaps where we get a little unstuck in the political scene.
Yeah, it's very difficult if you're looking at it, say, from a theological position or a biblical position to say should you or shouldn't you, because I'm not sure that the Bible gives us that kind of clear picture. I think what happens is that in our particular electoral system, there is an opportunity, as Brent was saying before, for niche parties, for small parties, and we have the Maori Party, the Green Party and so on, to represent a part of the constituency. And I guess one of the things that they're hoping for is to almost exercise some leverage beyond what their numbers represent Now that might raise an interesting question for Christians. You know, do we really want to use a leverage situation? But I think the salt and light is a crucial point, and we do see regularly this debate come up: should you have a Christian party or should you not, or a Christian flavour party, if you want to call it that. And again, the church is very divided on that sort of issue, and I think different personalities and even different theologies will inform you and incline you to go down one path or the other.
I had an interesting conversation with Dr. Peter Sharples, who co-leader of the Māori Party, who of course did very well in the election. And one of the things he said was that although there were Māori politicians within the main parties, in the end they had to toe the party line, whereas the Māori Party towed the Māori line.
And that same comment has actually been made by Christians working within the mainstream parties or the major parties. You know, at one time, Labour was described as applied Christianity, the Labour Party. Many people would say that it's moved from those roots, while other people would look at them and say, no, it's actually still very solid on them. So you get a diversity of views there. But certainly we have heard that comment before, that to be a Christian within the major parties means that you have to toe the line, and you can't actually express the positions that you want as clearly as you could in a separate party. So the arguments are strong both ways.
And I think in particular within the Labour government, what many Christians would see as social engineering, I think there are a number of people that would describe themselves as traditional Labour voters because of the welfare system and the concern for the poor and the marginalised, who have been challenged in that view because of what they see as social policy that they find difficult to line up on. And I'm aware of politicians, people who've gone into some of the Christian parties with that very reason in mind. We don't see it as viable to actually be salt in a major party. Now, whether they're right or wrong on that, that's actually what they're saying.
You're both senior people in the church in New Zealand. Should we be giving people more of a lead as to what they should look for in their politicians? I know that as we went through the election, the whole process on End Zone Tonight, we were trying all the time to try to identify the issues that mattered. But in the end, you go in that little paper box thing that you vote in, and you have your big orange pen, and you're on your own. And you know, should we be giving Christians more of a lead into what they should be looking for?
Well, I'm a pastor of a local church, and I'm not going to stand up on a Sunday and tell people who to vote for. I enjoy my job, but at the same time, I do think there's a responsibility to help people engage the whole process, because it's quite complicated and it's very ambiguous for Christians. We ran an electoral forum where we actually had a panel discussion where people could actually raise questions, and it covered everything from protest voting to Christian parties or not, and really looking to get at the principles of how to exercise a vote, and of course remembering to vote.
Yeah. Well, Glyn, it's part of the Vision Network. I mean, his problem written big.
I was speaking in their church, and I've spoken in a number of churches before the election. I think the answer is absolutely yes. We should be equipping people. It's part of discipling, and it comes back to the kingdom of God issue that we were talking about before. One's conception of what the kingdom of God is like informs how you'll vote and who you'll vote for. Right. And so when Jesus said many occasions, the kingdom of God is like, and then he gave illustrations of it, and he demonstrated it in his own life. And so I think just part of maturing believers, discipling believers and equipping them means to inform them on what the kingdom of God is like, and therefore where they should be voting. There's another interesting point here, which is that we've got to be very careful of thinking that any one particular party is more like the kingdom of God than other parties, because there were aspects of most of the parties, if not all of them, that reflected an aspect of the kingdom of God. And so it's kind of getting the balance in there. And we put out a document which was picked up by many churches around the country called 11 Questions to Ask Your Local Candidates. And people were picking that up and using those in forums as they invited candidates into their churches. And it covered a range of issues from environment through to family, through to other issues, financial and so on, and also about character. What will any of these politicians do to shift the focus from just that material, physical kind of existence to something that's deeper?
Gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll see what happens in 3 years' time.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Thanks.